Okay, so what kind of moon do we have out there tonight? Anybody look at it? What? Is it a waxing crescent or a waning crescent? Waxing crescent, okay? Waxing crescent. Okay, just wanted to see if you're paying attention. What's going on? All right, well, this is one of my favorite messages, and I hope it'll be one of your favorites as well. So we're going to talk about the moon. So we read about the moon in Genesis 1, 14 through 19. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night. Let them be for signs and for seasons, for days and years. Let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of the heaven, give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. So our topic is that lesser light, mentioned in verse 16, our moon, same moon that Adam and Eve looked at, 250,000 miles away, or mere light seconds if you prefer. It's quarter the size of the Earth, so it would be a lunar baseball compared to the Earth's basketball. So where did the moon come from? Well, we're told here, God's spoken into existence on day 4 of creation. But what if you don't believe the Bible? Where did the moon come from? And many careers and many dollars have been spent trying to figure out where the moon came from. So the first theory I remember was the fission theory. So when I was in junior high school, I took earth science, and my earth science book had a picture of the formation of the moon. And it had the moon like a molten blob coming out of the earth, and where it came out, in my book, it showed that's where the Pacific Ocean was. Okay? I wish I still had that book and that picture, okay? But it must have been true because I had a picture of it, coming out like that. And so I was duly impressed. The problem with that is that it didn't have enough turning energy for that to work. And the Earth would have to be spinning 10 times faster than it's spinning today for that to work. And so you imagine trying to get all your work done 24 hours. What if you had to get everything done in 2.5 hours a day? What if a day was 2.5 hours? And so that was a problem. And then there's this small problem with the Roche limit, R-O-C-H-E. So the moon, the Earth exerts tidal forces on the moon, the front of the moon, the back of the moon. Because of that difference in tidal forces, if the moon is too close to the Earth, it just rips it apart. At the Roche limit or breakup limit of the moon. And so if it came out like a blob, it would get ripped apart. You'd have a ring. You wouldn't have a moon. So that was a problem. And then we went to the moon, and we got some moon rocks. And it turns out that moon rocks have a different chemical composition. The Earth has lots of iron in it, and the moon doesn't have very much iron at all. So they finally gave up on the fission theory, okay? And the next theory they had was the capture theory. So we picture the moon as a planet, out there in the solar system somewhere, and it's coming around, and somehow it inserts itself into almost a perfectly circular orbit around the Earth. Okay. Well, when I was a boy, I grew up on the New Jersey side of Philadelphia area. And so when I was a young teenager, I would take the high-speed line into Philadelphia to the Franklin Institute, which was the big science museum there in Philadelphia. And one of the things that attracted me as a young teenager was the fact they had a proto-video game. This is before video games had been invented. And so the video game was to see if you could take a rocket ship and change the velocity and the angle and so forth, and see if you could insert that rocket ship in an orbit around the planet. And you can imagine as a young teenager, I tried and tried and tried and tried, and I never could do it. My rocket ship would always go, out in outer space somewhere. So even at that young age, I realized that it's very difficult to get something in orbit around a circular, especially a circular orbit around on a planet like that. Well, nobody else could believe it either, okay, that the moon inserted itself into this orbit. And so they finally gave up on that idea. And so the next idea they had was what they call the condensation theory. That is, they had this big cloud of dust and rock and so forth, and and gases and so forth, and the gravitation would pull it together and form the Earth and the moon. Well, there's of course a problem with that is that what happens when you pull dust and gas together, it gets hot, okay? And when it gets hot, it has outward pressure pushing it back out again. You have to have some sort of shock to push it together. But let's just forget that for now. Nobody could figure out why you got two things. Why did you get an Earth and a moon? Why didn't you just get, one bigger Earth? Now, this theory is having a revival recently. They know that the current theory of how the moon was formed doesn't really work. And so they've tried to take all the data and put it into a computer, and it's what they call the synasia theory. And the synasia theory, it's kind of like this, but it's a little bit different in that in the synasia theory, the moon forms first and then the Earth. But it still doesn't work out as far as the abundance of elements and the crust of each one and that kind of thing. And so they're still working on that. It's a work in progress. So if you go to the web and you say, where did the moon come from? Go to the NASA site. This is what they'll tell you. This is what's taught in every school in the county here, in the state, in public schools. And it's called the collision theory. I call it the big whack, okay? And so this, they get a picture of it, see? So you have a planet the size of Mars, comes, and they call it Theia. They give it a name Theia, and it hits the Earth, and the debris comes up, and you get the moon from that. But it doesn't work out. It doesn't even work in computers, okay? You have to have more than one whack. You have to have a whack from this side and a whack from that side to get the turning energy right, okay? And so they know that. They know it doesn't work. But they still teach it anyway. And there's another problem, is that, the moon is moving away from the Earth at a speed of 1.5 inches per year. Every year, the moon's 1.5 inches further away from us than it is now. Well, that's not a problem for those of us who believe that the Earth-Moon system is 6,000 or 7,000 years old. But if you believe that it's billions of years old, now you got a problem, okay? That, even after 1 billion years, that puts the Earth and the moon right next to each other. In fact, it puts the moon inside the Roche limit, and you get a ring, you don't get a moon. Not to mention the fact that tidal forces on the Earth would be so great that not only would you have 2 high tides a day, but the high tides would be so high, it would wash over all the land surfaces every day with that big of a tidal effect, okay? So, there's something fundamentally wrong with teaching a theory to children that it doesn't work. And so the scientists know this doesn't work. They admit that it doesn't work, and yet it's still in textbooks everywhere because they don't have a better alternative yet. Like I said, they're still working on the synasia theory. Maybe that'll be the next one they come up with. Well, what if you don't believe the Bible, and there's no secular theory of moon formation that works? What do you do then? Well, this is it. The artificial moon theory. So there's a couple guys wrote a book, Butler and Knight, and they wrote this book called Who Built the Moon? And they think the moon is kind of like the Death Star, okay, from Star Wars. And they spent the whole book telling you why they believe the moon is an artificial object, not a natural object at all. And the idea is that the aliens built the moon And when we get smart enough to figure out that it's an artificial object, they're going to come back. And they're going to invite us to join their parliament or Congress or whatever, aliens have, okay? So, because we're smart enough to join them. So that's their idea. I know it sounds really wacko, but they have really a lot of good proofs that the moon is not normal. It's not a natural object. And the biggest proof is this. I call God's signature in the sky. So during the eclipse, was it March? We were in Findlay, Ohio for the eclipse. And the thing you notice is that the moon and the sun are the same size in the sky. Now, how's that possible? Well, the sun's 400 times further from the Earth than the moon is, but the sun is also 400 times larger than the moon is, and so they're the same size in the sky. There's no other planet in our solar system, no other planet in any other solar system that we've looked at, where if standing on the surface of that planet, we would see the moon of that planet and the sun of the planet the same size in the sky. This is the only place, okay? And not only that, since the moon's been receding, if you believe that the Earth-Moon system is billions of years old, it's only at this particular time in history where they're the same size in the sky. And that's why I call it God's signature in the sky, because it's like he signed it. It said, I did this. Isaac Asimov was a PhD biochemist, wrote a lot of science fiction. He was also the president of the Humanist Society. And he said that this was the greatest proof for a creator God if it wasn't a coincidence. Okay? But somehow he knew it was a coincidence. But if it hadn't been a coincidence, it would have been a proof for the creator God. I think it's pretty good proof otherwise. Okay. So why did God create the moon? Well, the Bible tells us. Jeremiah 31:35, thus saith the Lord, which giveth the moon for a light by night. So it's a night light. Okay, you can see it out there. It's a night light. Okay, among other things. Deuteronomy 33:14 says, and for the precious fruits brought forth by the sun, and for the precious things brought forth by the moon. So I know my name is George, and George means farmer. I'm as far from a farmer as you could get, okay? I grew up in the city, and I couldn't sleep unless there were, trains by all night long, okay? If some friend invited me to go out to the country to sleep at his house, I couldn't sleep. It was too quiet, okay? So I'm not a city. In fact, when I was 12 years old, my public school took us on a field trip to see a cow. I'd never seen a cow close up. I thought milk came in those glass bottles they delivered to our door, okay? So I am not a farmer. But as I travel around and I talk to farmers, even in Australia I've talked to farmers, I said, does the moon have anything to do with the crops? And they say yes. And they tell me what and how and so forth. And I've read some research papers talking about the crude rye input, grain content in rye grains and how it's affected by the phase of the moon and so forth. So I don't know about all that. But we don't know how this works. The point is that we don't know how this works. So what do you do? What do you do when you read the Bible and there's something that doesn't seem to be the work as far as our current science is concerned? We don't know how the moon affects the crops. And the answer is, this is a loose translation from the German, from Martin Luther. He said, give God the honor of being smarter than you are. Okay? Give God the honor of being smarter than you are. And what I'm saying here is that when you find something like that, you realize that God's the one who created this world. And that our science hasn't caught up to what God knows. Okay? And so don't let those kind of things bother you. People want to know, can the moon affect human behavior? Psalm 121:6, the sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. Now, I understand about the sun smiting you by day because of my hairstyle. Okay, I have to wear a hat. So how does the moon smite people? I don't know. Here's another one. Matthew 4:24, and Jesus' fame went throughout all Syria, and they brought unto him those which were, among other things, lunatic, and he healed them. So lunatic literally means moonstruck. Now, if you take a modern translation, this is from the Authorized Version, but if you take a modern translation, they'll often interpret this word epileptic. There's nothing in the Greek word that means epileptic, okay? It's just a modern gloss. The translators are trying to figure out what it means, and so they put epileptic there, okay? It literally means moonstruck. So again, I talked to mental health workers, I've talked to teachers, I've talked to policemen and so forth. I say, does the moon have any effect on your job? They said, oh yeah, when there's a full moon out, we got to put extra staff on and all that type of thing. And I hear that everywhere I go. Now, every church, every good Bible-preaching fundamental church has at least one crazy person in it. Okay, don't raise your hand if you're that person. We were in Dr. Innes's church in San Francisco, and there was a guy in the back. He said, "That's me." He said, and everybody turned around and said, "That's him," and they were right. And so at least he knew who he was. But there was a crazy guy, and that's good. It's good that people that have mental illness, that they find love in churches like ours. I mean, that's a good thing. We used to go to Australia, and we went to Wally Jaworski's church there. And he had a crazy guy in the church. His name was John. And sometimes John would he loved the Lord, but he was crazy. And he would get off his meds, and they'd have to send him to do time in the local mental hospital. So I went to visit him, and I said, "John, how'd you sleep last night?" "Oh," he said, "there was a full moon last night." He says that the other people here, they're rattling the bars, and they're climbing the walls, and they're howling like wolves and so forth. He said, "There's a lot of crazy people here." I said, "No, John, that's why, they're here." Anyway, so even this crazy guy, he understood that the moon affected people's behavior. Again, what do we make of that scientifically? And the answer is, give God the honor of being smarter than you are. Maybe someday science will figure it out, but we don't know yet. Ancient people used the moon to tell time. Here's the Antikythera mechanism found at the bottom of the Aegean Sea. And it's remarkable. It's an analog computer made of brass. And we've been able to scan it and so forth and reproduce it. But you try making one of those. I mean, it showed the position of all the planets they could see at the time and the phases of the moon and so forth perfectly just by turning the dials. Absolutely amazing what they were able to do. So don't let people tell you that ancient people were dumb, okay? They were not dumb, okay? They may not have the technology we have, but they weren't dumb. Ancient people used the moon instead of a calendar. The month is roughly based on the phases of the moon. Before compasses were invented, the moon was used to tell direction. And then in Psalm 104:19, it says, "He appointed the moon for seasons." And not just seasons like we think of seasons, but the festivals that the Israelites would celebrate, okay, certain times of the year. They would know what time of the year it was based on the moon. That's the idea. But seasons, let's talk about the seasons in the moon. So what causes the seasons? As I mentioned, I think on Sunday, some people have the wrong idea that when the earth is closer to the sun, it's summertime. When it's further away, it's wintertime. But that's not true. Actually, in the northern hemisphere, we're a little closer to the sun in the wintertime. Okay? But it doesn't make a very big difference. The main reason for the seasons is the tilt of the moon, 23.5 degrees. So when this is the sun of the earth, yes, tilt of the earth, tilt of the earth. That's why I have her here to help me. All right, tilt of the earth. So when the northern hemisphere is tilted toward the sun, that's summertime, and when it's tilted away, that's wintertime. And that tilt is fairly stable. We talked about that Sunday as well. We mentioned that Mars has a couple little moons no big moon like ours. And so the tilt of Mars goes from 0 to 60 degrees. Okay? You can't live on a planet like that where the tilt is constantly changing. And we mentioned that our moon has a very unusual orbit. Our moon circles the planet in what we call the ecliptic. Most moons circle the planet in the equatorial, that is the fattest part of the planet. Ours is in the ecliptic. Now, what's the ecliptic? Well, if you remember from your 10th grade geometry, a plane is defined by 3 points. Isn't that right, Greg? That's right. Bring back bad memories for Greg. Anyway, so the 3 points are the sun, the moon, and the earth. That's the ecliptic. Okay, and that's why we get eclipses from time to time. And because it's in that unusual orbit, it stabilizes the tilt of the moon. Okay, so how did the psalmist know that the moon was there for the seasons? Well, that's a little bit of scientific foreknowledge, isn't it? And so here's a picture of the earth and the moon going across it. And I showed you where the tilt is. So the satellite is 1 million miles closer to the sun than the moon is, and looking back at the moon going across the earth. And what do you notice about it? You notice how dark the moon is. Now, we normally see the moon against the blackness of outer space, but here we're looking at it against the earth. It looks really dark. So the moon has a reflectivity about the same as worn asphalt in a parking lot or a road or something like that. It's very dark. You say, why did God make the moon dark? He made it dark because there are a lot of biological organisms that take their cues from the moon and the sun. And so if the moon was too bright, it would throw all that whole thing off, okay, all those biorhythms and that type of thing. So he made it dark on purpose. And we find that God created the moon to glorify himself. Psalm 148, verse 3 says, "Praise ye him, sun and moon, praise him, all ye stars of light." Now, I've heard you sing, I've heard you praise the Lord in song, but you may have noticed that the man in the moon doesn't have a mouth. So how does the moon praise God if it doesn't have a mouth? Okay. Well, it praises God by doing what it was designed to do, okay? And so the moon produces the tides. The tides cause the ocean currents to flow. Those ocean currents take the dead organic matter at the bottom of the ocean and cause it to come up to the top where green plants can eat it, like algae. And those green plants produce oxygen, okay? And then you breathe that oxygen. So the moon keeps you alive. I know you think that most of the oxygen you breathe comes from the Amazon. That's not true. Most of the oxygen comes from the ocean. And so the moon praises God by keeping you alive, doing what it was designed to do. And guess what? We do the same thing. We praise God by doing what it was that we were designed to do. So I have this science thing, okay? I know it's not one of the fruits of the Spirit or whatever, but I have this science thing. And I try to use this science thing for God's glory. My wife's got this organization thing. And it takes a lot of work on her part to keep me moving in the right direction. And she tries to use this organization thing for the glory of God. And each one of you have something you were designed to do, like the moon. And just think, if all of you did it to the best of your ability, how much better this church would be, how much better this community would be, if we would all just do whatever it is that God created us to do. And you know what it is that you can do. Maybe you don't. You should ask somebody and say, what is it that I can do? Okay. And maybe the pastor will tell you, saying, oh, yeah, I'm glad somebody asked. Okay. So that would be a good thing. So he created the moon to glorify himself. He also made it beautiful. That's a characteristic of God's creation. I call it a hallmark of God's creation. He makes things functional, like keeping us alive, and beautiful. Song of Solomon 6:10, who is she? Solomon's talking about his first wife here. He says, who is she that looketh forth as the morning, fair as the moon, clear as the sun, and terrible as an army with banners? Now that terrible as an army with banners doesn't work too well on Valentine's cards, okay? Okay, but the idea he had was that he sees the stars marching across the sky at night, and to him it looked like soldiers lined up walking across the battlefield. He thought that was a beautiful thing, okay? So that's what he's talking about. Or 1 Corinthians 15:41, there's one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, another glory of the stars, for one star differeth from another star in glory. I think of this verse from a song, fair is the sunshine, fair still the moonlight, and all the twinkling starry host. Jesus shines brighter, Jesus shines purer than all the angels heaven can boast. And so if you're thinking, what's he talking about? He's talking about Jesus being more beautiful than the sun, moon, and stars? Yeah, okay. And how does that work? Well, it's called the gospel, okay? So if you don't understand the gospel, a lot of people around here would like to tell you about the gospel. Why we think Jesus Christ is the most beautiful thing in the universe, okay? Because of what he did for us on the cross. Well, we find the moon is a reminder of God's enduring promises. Psalm 72:5, they shall fear thee, speaking of Solomon as a type of Christ, as long as the sun and moon endure throughout all generations. Or Psalm 89, verse 37, it, speaking of the throne of David, shall be established forever as the moon, as a faithful witness in the heaven. Or Jeremiah 31:36, if those ordinances, talking about the ordinances of the sun and moon, depart from before me, saith the Lord, then the seed of Israel also shall cease from being a nation before me forever. So think about all those ancient nations that you study in Sunday school, okay? You know, the Hittites and the Amorites and the Ammonites and the Moabites and the Edomites and all those people. And where are they all? Okay, where do they exist today? Who's descended from them? We dug up some Philistines, and we took their DNA, because they were pretty well preserved there in the desert there. And guess what? There's nobody here that's related to the Philistines. Their line has completely died out. Okay, you may eat like a Philistine, but that's a whole different matter, okay? So nobody's related to the Philistines. And so which of those ancient groups still exists today? Israel. Israel's the only one. How do I know that Israel still exists? Because I can see the moon in the sky. As long as there's a moon in the sky, there's going to be an Israel. Okay? Of all those ancient nations. What a miracle that God has done here. And I think there's going to be a new moon someday, and a real new moon. For it says in Isaiah 66, verses 22 and 23, for as the new heavens and the new earth, which I shall make, shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. And it shall come to pass from one new moon to another, from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. So it looks like there's going to be a new moon and a new sun and new universe, new everything, and that when there's a new heavens and new earth. And there'll still be a moon. Now, it won't be important. I mean, the sun won't be as important because the Lord is the light of that city. But they'll still be there to remind us of God's promises. We find the moon can be a sign of coming calamity. Luke 21:25, there shall be signs in the sun, the moon, and the star upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. And I think most commentators agree the sea and the waves roaring is political upheaval. You know, the turmoil of the nations and so forth. So do we see any of that turmoil? Do we see any of that perplexity in our world today? Anything happening in our country between now and November, or anything, any turmoil? And pick a country. Pick any country you want to, okay? It doesn't have to be just Ukraine or Gaza or any place. There's turmoil and upheaval and perplexity and so forth. And that was forecast to take place. And then in Isaiah 30, verse 26, we see the glory of Christ in the millennial kingdom. Moreover, the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun. The light of the sun shall be sevenfold as the light of 7 days, a day when the Lord bindeth up the breach of his people and healeth the stroke of their wound. Now, I don't take this literally because he's using the word seven, a number of perfection. He's not saying that the sun will be actually, 7 times brighter than it is now. What he's saying is that there's going to be perfect healing in that day for God's people when he binds up the breach of their wound. He's promising a wonderful future to all those who believe in him. Okay? And that should be an encouragement to us, what he has planned for us. Eye has not seen, neither has ear heard, neither has it entered into the heart of man, things that God has prepared for those who love him. Well, here's a picture of the moon and an aurora. So back, was it 1981? I think it was 81. And I think we went on the Nova Scotia team. Our daughters were 2 and 3 years old back then. And we stopped at Dublin Christian Academy on our way to the Canadian border to get our paperwork in order. My wife was always in charge of that. And that summer, there was a wonderful aurora. I mean, it just lit up the sky there in Nova Scotia. And my coworker, Nelson McGew, who's with the Lord now, he picked up my little daughter, Katie, off the ground. He said, look, he's trying to show her the aurora, And when he picked her up, she was playing with a stick on the ground, and she dropped the stick. And she wouldn't look up. She said, stick. She wanted that stick, all right? And she wouldn't look up at the beauty in the heavens. And that's the way we are. Now, our sticks may be different. Okay, maybe they're these kind of sticks. I don't know. Anyway, we don't look up. Okay, here God has placed the moon in the heavens to remind us of the wonderful promises for those who believe in him. And what do we look at? We look at the sticks of our jobs and our relationships and difficulties that we experience day by day. When you go out tonight, look at the moon and remember that the moon is a promise to you of a wonderful future with God forever. And I think you'll be encouraged. I'm encouraged when I look at the moon. Okay, what questions do you have tonight? Just, yeah.
You said that the moon is a sign of coming calamity. What can you expand on that?
Okay, so it tells us that the moon and the sun will be turned into blood. That is, they'll be blood-colored. Okay? And so we're not sure exactly what that means other than the fact that when you get a lot of dust up in the air because of refraction, they turn blood color. So
big forest fires.
Could be a big forest fire. It talks about a third of the trees being burned up. That would certainly do it. Okay? And a nuclear exchange would do it. So I can't speculate on what that's going to be, but apparently it's going to be obvious to everyone that the great calamity has taken place because of the color of the sun and the moon. Okay? Good question. Yes?
Please repeat the question.
Question was, you figured it out. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes? What's that?
Is there going to be a moon in heaven or not?
Well, it looks like there will be. I can let your pastor, make the final word on that. But from what I read, it looks like there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth and a new moon. Not the kind of new moon we have now where it's all dark, but a real new moon that he's going to recreate in the new heavens and new earth where we will dwell. Okay? So that's going to be exciting. Yes?
We have sheep, and on your lodge, which is in February usually, they always sees the full moon.
Okay.
What is it about the full moon that makes the birthing process occur? I know people that work with nurses or gynecologists
Yes.
will say the same thing.
Yes. It seems like what causes the full moon to occur with birthing with animals and people and so forth. And the studies I've seen seem to be related to how bright the moon is in the sky. In other words, when there's clouds across it, you don't get the same effect. So it has something to do about the luminosity of the moon, as far as I can tell. But again, we don't understand this. Give God the honor of being smarter than you are. Okay? Yes, sir.
This might be a Siri question, but volcanic activity on the moon, geology on the moon, I know there's evidence of things like that, but is it, when the Earth went through its fountain of the deep, the flood and all that, I've heard some people speculate that the moon may have as well gone through some things like that. I don't remember where it was.
So Danny Faulkner has a theory. He's the astronomer at AIG, and he has big chunks of ice coming from deep in outer space, and they hit Mars first and cause a worldwide flood on Mars. And secular scientists don't have any problem with worldwide floods on Mars. It's only on the Earth they have problems with it, okay? And then it hits the Earth, helps cause the flood here, helps break up the fountains at the Great Deep and so forth, and then it slams into the near side of the moon. And so you notice the near side of the moon looks different than the far side of the moon, and it looks like it's been hit with something really hard. And it also explains why there's more water mixed in with the regolith on the near side of the moon than on the far side of the moon. So that's his theory. I don't know how you prove it one way or the other, but maybe that's what you're thinking about, okay? It's very possible. Anything else? Yes?
Sometimes if everything's just right, you have a full moon and you can see it when it's just above the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot bigger than it might be a half hour later.
Mm-hmm.
What are we witnessing then?
Okay, so the question is, why does the moon look larger when it's on the horizon? We've all seen that. And it's an optical illusion, okay? So one way to tell it's optical illusion is to take like a quarter and block it out, with your hand, and then measure how far it is from here to there, okay? And then when it gets higher in the sky, do the same thing. You'll see it's the same distance, okay? The other way to do it is to look through your legs. I'm not going to do it, but look upside down. The brain, when you look at it upside down, the brain doesn't do the same thing, and it looks smaller then. So I won't tell anybody who did it, but I've tried it. I've tried looking through my legs at the moon, and it really doesn't work. Okay, I was a little younger back when I did that. Okay, so it's an optical illusion, is what it is. So when the brain sees the moon against the trees and so forth, it interprets it as being larger than it actually is. Okay, you learn something every day, don't you? Yeah. Okay. See, it was worth the price of admission. Yeah, there you go.
She's too shy. She wants to know, why does the harvest moon look red?
Harvest moon. So harvest moon is what? It
happens in France in September. So when this comes up from the horizon, it's really bright.
Oh, I see.
Red.
Well, often the moon looks red when it's on the horizon because, it's going through all that atmosphere, okay? And so the red light is able to curve around the curvature of the Earth better than so actually the moon's not there. The moon is actually below the horizon, and you're just seeing the moon, the rays of the moon being, wrapped around the curvature of the Earth.
Is that what happens when it sets?
Same thing.
Setting?
That's right. So it's hard to say, when does the sun set or when does the moon set and that type of thing, because we see it after it's set, because the rays wrap around the curvature of the Earth. So years ago, I was in Washington State, and I had my first encounter with our flat Earth friends. And they were trying to convince me that the Earth was flat. And I thought this was just nuts. But I listened to them. They went to her first, and she pushed them off to me. And so I didn't read any of their stuff or know anything about it. And I said, well, why are sunsets red? Because I was thinking about the fact that because the red can bend more than the other colors. And they said, we'll get back to you on that. and I gave him my email address. I'm still waiting to hear from him why sunsets are. I didn't realize it wasn't part of their standard repertoire, so I just accidentally came across something that they didn't have an answer for. So anyway, yes, so that's what's going on there. It looks red because the red light bends more than the other shades. Thank you. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Coming in tonight, the moon is right up there.
Yeah.
And to me, it looks like it has a double image or an eclipse.
It looks like a double image. You say it looks like a double image?
Yeah.
Okay, so can you tell me,
Tell me it's my eyes.
has he been seeing things? I mean, this sounds like a medical question. Where's our nurse? Okay.
When you go out,
Okay. Did anybody see the same thing and saw a double moon? You saw one. Okay.
Not since I had my cataracts removed.
Yeah, well, that's true. I've had my cataracts removed, and I kind of saw double before I had my cataracts taken out. So that's possible. I don't know. So I suggest you see a medical professional. So sometimes we see, double objects in the sky because of the, intervening haze and water vapor in the atmosphere, that type of thing. Yes?
Got a question about how the aurora borealis happens.
Okay, aurora borealis. So the sun is putting out what we call coronal mass ejections. So some of the stuff of the sun actually gets away from it, blows out into outer space. And when it heads toward us, it's magnetic. It's charged particles. It has a magnetic field associated with it. It hits our magnetic field, and our magnetic field comes out of the North Pole and goes down to the South Pole, like that. And so all those particles and things ride the magnetic field of the Earth to the North Pole or the South Pole. Okay? If they ride it to the North Pole, then that's called, those charged particles are very energetic, and they actually excite the molecules in the air, like oxygen and nitrogen, and that makes them glow. And so we get all those different colors. Okay? It's actually quite complicated, as far as the altitude and which particular molecule it is, and how excited it gets and so forth, what particular color that you get. But it is really beautiful. But didn't we have an aurora recently here? Did you have one recently? Last couple nights. Huh? Okay, and that's because we got hit by one of those coronal mass ejections. And so I think I mentioned to you about the Carrington event, 1859. It was the biggest one we've ever measured, and it fried all the telegraph offices, okay? And so if we get a really big one, Lord doesn't protect us, estimates are it would take 2 full years to restore all the power around the Earth. So that would be a problem for a lot of people. So think about doing without modern technology for a couple years. Okay? Any other questions? Oh, yes.
What you just spoke of, the aurora borealis, when all those parts are hitting,
Yes.
is it also hotter in that area?
Yes. So the question was, when the particles are excited in the magnetosphere, does it get in the Van Allen belts and all that? Does it get warmer? It does. It does warm it up, and we can actually measure the change in temperature up there. Okay, so that has to be balanced too. When we think about all the incoming and outgoing energy balances, we have to balance the auroras as well. Though it's fairly short period, that it does that. Yes, sir.
About how far away are those particles when we get to witness them?
Well, it depends where you live. How far are the particles when we get to witness them? Obviously, closer you are to the North Pole, the closer you're going to be to them. You're talking about how far up they are in the sky.
Right. Are they in our atmosphere?
They're in our atmosphere. So, yeah, so it's actually, so it's not going to be more than 5 miles up. So it's actually the oxygen and nitrogen molecules that are actually being excited that are causing those colors. Okay, so yes, they're in our atmosphere. So one of the things about the Earth's magnetic field is that it's moving. I don't know if you know that, but the North Pole has been moving towards Siberia, and it's going faster and faster and faster, okay? And it's actually left the continent of Australia now. And it's interesting, both the North Pole and the South Pole are headed toward each other. On the current path they're on, they would meet in Indonesia somewhere. And that's not going to happen. They're not going to have the North Pole and the South Pole in the same place. And so some scientists think that we're getting set up for a magnetic pole reversal, okay, where it flips over. We've seen some of these reversals in the past in the rocks. We think that during the flood, Noah's flood, there was some rapid reversals going back and forth like every week. And we can actually see the signature in the rocks during that time when everything was, in a state of flux back then. And so they're thinking that this will be the first magnetic reversal since the flood. Now, what would that mean for us? Already we see right off the coast of Brazil, we have the what they call the South Atlantic anomaly. And they actually have to turn the satellites off when it gets to there. Otherwise, they'll get fried, by the high energy particles. And so if you think about that South Atlantic anomaly is right on the opposite side of the Earth from where the two poles would meet someday in Indonesia. So it makes sense. So if it flips, we'll be without a shield, a magnetic shield for some period of time. And so we would expect cancer rates to skyrocket as a result. And I was always interested thinking about the kings of the earth in Revelation. It says they're hiding themselves in caves and under the rocks of the earth. And maybe it's going to be at that time. The reason they're down there is because there's no protective shield during that time. And they know, it talks about the sun being 10 times hotter than it was before. Maybe it's 10 times more radiation, really. And they're actually hiding from all that radiation underground. Maybe that's going to be something that happens in the future. So if any of you are here during the tribulation period, you can let me know about that. I don't plan to be here. Okay. Any other questions? Those are all really good questions. Well, it's been a lot of fun, and tomorrow night will be our last night. We'll be talking about the scoffers, okay, and what the Bible has to say about the scoffers. I've been posting things on different creation websites, on Facebook and so forth, just to get a feel for the scoffers. And they are out there. They're out there in force. Why they lurk on creation websites, I have no idea. But they're a real presence. And so we'll talk about what the Bible has to say about the scoffers in our world. So let's go ahead and pray, and I'll let you go. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the folks that came out tonight. We thank you, Lord, that we were able to look at the moon and how you created the moon and how you had the moon praise you. And Lord, you're just a wonderful God, and you do all things well. And we're just in awe of your creative activity. Help us all tonight when we leave to look at the moon and to think about all the wonderful promises you have for those who love you in that new heavens and new earth where righteousness dwells. We thank you for this. Bring us back safely tomorrow for Jesus' sake. Amen. Thank you.